My name is Mookie Colhan. I am the Innovation Co-Lead for IBC, working alongside my colleague Mark Smith, if you're here for the blockchain session earlier. And this very, very, very special the project that we're here to talk about today is around 6 degrees of freedom in audio, in narrative and music-led experiences in the metaverse, and it's exploring, the spatial content and how it fits in within broadcasting and our interactive audio, but really, really thinking about how we're bringing in the use of audio within our linear worlds into the interactive element, and then seeing, where does the audio definition model fall into play? ADM. So without further ado, we've had a really, really amazing selection of champions and participants. Our champions on this project have been the BBC, Paramount, King's College London, and also participants Magic Beans. That was champions. Participants Magic Beans, TuneURL, and White Light. And so with me today, I've got 3 out of our 8 consortium members, 7 consortium members. And with me today is John Olive from Magic Beans. We've got Yep Desenga from TuneURL, and of course Gareth Llewellyn from Magic Beans again. Round of applause, please, from our esteemed panel. Thank you very much. Now, we did have Paramount due to take part, but they had to catch an earlier flight. And of course, the BBC have quite a big issue on their hands, and they're dealing with a couple of things. So thank you for your patience, and thanks for coming along to talk about spatial audio. And are we ready to nerd out together? Because I certainly am too. So I think I want to just start with you, Gareth, because what's really great is that you are a returning participant. You were involved in the program last year as Magic Beans. And I'd like you just kind of to kick off and tell us a little bit more about the origins of the project, how it came about, and kind of the evolution from Kickstart Day.
Yep. So in 2021, we were participants in audio, sound, and imagery. This looked at the use of immersive audio for spoken word and for music. So we looked at creating sort of fixed head binaural versions of an audible narrative. We looked at binaural versions of a piece of music. And the section that we came on as Magic Beans at the end was to do 6 degrees of freedom version. It was a limited 6 degrees of freedom, and I'm sure some of you know what that means, but we mean the ability to move freely in all directions and with rotation in a piece of content. So this is something that's very much going to become popularized with wearables, with the advent of wearables. And we created it in 2021 using the webcam. So we were tracking heads, and we did a limited 6 DOF. So 6 DOF doesn't necessarily mean large space.
We do have some visuals to go with the audio.
There you go, 6 DOF as compared to 3 DOF. So 3 DOF is just rotation, 6 DOF is being able to freely move around. It doesn't necessarily mean a large space. It can be just moving around in a chair. The way we actually make sense of the world is through head movements of all kinds. So it effectively allows you to create a much higher resolution, much more realistic immersive experience. And on the back of that, we were interested in returning this year to really expand on the 6 DOF aspect and look at to what extent spatial content can be led by audio. How can you create a reasonably large format 6 DOF experience led by audio, and how would that fit into a broadcast chain? Now, at the moment, they're quite separate beasts, but I think they are going to be. There's going to be a world in the future where these sort of come together, and that was what the purpose of this was to look at these aspects.
And keep a hold of that clicker, Gareth, because we have a couple more slides, and so. Just kind of deeper diving also with the integration of TuneURL, and tell us a little bit more about what was explored for the objectives here.
Okay.
And here we are.
This is the group. We already know that.
Yeah.
So we were looking at a number of things. We wanted to look at spatial content. We've used the term the Metaverse. So we're interested as well in making location-based experience that might be accessed by wearables, but also delivering that to large audience. So part of it was looking at making a digital twin and taking standard formats. So it's taking stuff that would come from a standard broadcast and creating these this value from it. One major aspect as well was to look at how this might fit into established chains. Yap from TuneURL is going to talk about making interactions from linear media, making it sort of more interactive and bringing some immersion that way. And we ultimately wanted to examine to what extent audio standards could be used or could be extended to be able to describe these sorts of things. I think uptake is based on the ability to interchange this sort of media in different systems. So the BBC were also looking at that aspect of things.
And we had some really great partners on board this year also that were kind of an extension of the group. I think we have a VT coming up next that shows a little bit more about some of the behind the scenes on these explorations. Oh, yep, you're way ahead of yourself, guy. You're way ahead of yourself.
Okay.
Okay, let's tell us a little bit more about this before we get to that VT.
So the project was structured around two pieces of content. There's two pieces of core content. One came from Paramount MTV. This was a part of their I Love MTV music concert. We had a slice of that concert which we were going to recreate in 6DOF, free roam. And Darkfield, who are an amazing immersive theatre company, they make pitch black binaural experiences in shipping containers. They were looking at making a free roam narrative. So we took those two pieces of content. They went into post-production. We looked at creating a digital twin, a real-time version of that. And then we looked at the transmedia output, so the various ways we could take that sort of location-based experience, a digital twin, and create a series of standard and immersive outputs.
And you've got the VT coming up next then.
Yeah.
I love you guys so much, and I love you, Malta. This is my last song, so please just have a good time, be with me. I'm May Muller, and this is Better Day.
My name's Glenn Neath. I'm from Darkfield. For 5 or 6 years, we've been making shows in complete darkness using binaural sound, where the audience is stationary because it's completely dark. But for this project, we're really interested in well, we've been interested for a while in the idea of free roam experiences where audience are able to move around inside a space, in a dimly lit space. And this project is really exciting for us because it will allow us to do that. It will allow us to play with an audience in terms of how the audience relate to each other, moving around in a space.
So you wanted to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty now about the production workflows.
Yep.
So tell us about these production workflows and like under the hood of the audio capture,
Yep.
how the audio was captured, and then what happened next, especially with regards to your work stream here.
Yeah, so part of the stipulation, part of the rules we set out for this was it had to take standard inputs. So this was standard broadcast inputs. For the narrative, that consisted of a whole bunch of sound design and a bunch of dialogue recordings. For the concert, we literally took what came out of the board at that concert, and we took it through this process, which was quite a traditional process, editing, taking out all of the bleed and stuff. We need quite clean signals to recreate later all the acoustics. So effectively, we're going to recreate information that allows you to place these in space. Along with the sort of the mixing, the aesthetics of it. That's an important part. So there's probably more editorial that has to happen on that audio to begin with than you would traditionally, where you can kind of mix it up and hide it in a stereo. You can't really hide it when an audience can go up and listen to it. So that's one aspect that's quite a leap. It's more intense. And then we took this into a real-time engine. So we had all this sort of, this monos and stereo information. We put it into a real-time engine, and then there's a whole other process of post-production, which is creating the spatial information, creating the relationships in an acoustic environment, and then mixing again. And that consists, obviously, of not mixing with faders. It's more programmatic mixing. So it's basically giving a set of instructions.
And do we have a visual of that workflow? I think coming up.
We've got a visual.
Go straight to the video.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, we were going to have someone from Paramount telling us about this, but this is the production. So one of the discussions we had around this was, do we want to recreate? The original thing was let's recreate what it's like to be on stage, and some of you probably have experience of being in or around a stage, and the sound isn't the kind of thing you want to reproduce. So there was very much a decision to look at this aesthetically. We wanted to give audiences the experience that they were on stage, that they were near the singer. we wanted it to sound like a produced piece of music. So we weren't using any particularly clever capture methods. I think there's not a lot of use for things like ambisonic microphones or multi-channel array capture with this sort of production.
Yeah.
You just want lots of nice, clean signals. One of the things we had to deal with was there was quite a bit of playback for this, so there was a lot of instrumentation that wasn't actually on the stage. So we fairly early on diverged from trying to slavishly copy the exact situation of being on stage, and we went for an aesthetic approach, I guess you would say.
Right, and I think we were talking about this. If you were going to recreate it, would you want it even more aesthetic?
Yeah, you could absolutely make it sound like it did on stage. I mean, that's very much choice.
Yeah.
But it's just, I mean, it's a cacophony usually up there. Everyone's got in-ears now. It doesn't sound very good. So yeah, the idea was to create, it's the vibe of the track. It's the feeling you get. So we tried to keep the energy up. And part of it, you don't have traditional controls in stereophonic mixing. You can compress things. You have a nice stereo bus. You can make it sort of fat, and you can't do any of that. So you have to really look at how you programmatically create a vibe. Mm-hmm. It's quite a challenging process. And I think a big part of it is the technology, but also the way you approach it and the way you. When you go close to things and come away from them, you have to keep it in sixth off. You have to keep this element of reality. And balance that with the aesthetic needs of mixing music,
Right, and the constantly thinking about, what is this experience in the next 3D worlds and that verse, and it is a marriage of the real life and, IRL and things that are happening in an alternative space.
We're never mixing. I mean, the difference between what you come out of a telly and what is actually happening there's always a big, gulf. You don't want it to be this sort of hyper-realistic. You want the spatial elements to be hyper-realistic, but the actual content itself needs to be aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Gareth. I'm just we know White Light are also somewhere at the IBC, and there was a mix-up, but thank you, John, for stepping in. We were talking about some of the ways that spatial content fits in to those more established roles of, the traditional broadcasting, those types of workflows. And we do have a small insert from Andy Hook at V from White Light, but do you want to just touch on that slightly around those effects around the spatial audio? What is it having on the industry right now?
I think I think spatial audio has kind of become a sort of a flavour du jour recently, and people are starting to get really interested in it. And part of that is due to some of the tools that have recently become available. Some of it is due to the capability of mobile devices in doing the processing. And I think people are starting to look for something extra, because they kind of seen, I think a lot of it has to do with, people have got used to the visual spectacle now, and they're wanting something more. And it seems, we certainly think at Magic Beans that a way to provide that is with audio, because audio gives you a connection with your audience. You can engage people in a way that purely visual stuff can't, in the sense that there's always in many ways, there's a almost conscious intellectual processing that happens with visuals that isn't the case with sound. Sound can get straight into your brain in a way that you don't have to. So visuals, you kind of see something, you go, okay, what's that? Okay, got it. Whereas sound just goes straight in and you emotionally react to it. And it's a really powerful tool to drive narrative. And I think people, because we're getting to the stage where we're able to present spatial audio in a level of quality that is, I'd say fair to say that in certain circumstances it's possible to convince you that it's actually real. It's now becoming a very interesting tool to use for driving a narrative, in conjunction with traditional methods of visuals and nice pretty lights and
So we at Kickstart Day. So the way the IBC Accelerators works is normally pitched by the champions, who are broadcasters in large media companies and studios, and that challenge is quite recognized by the industry on things that you've been thinking about or wanting to work on, but might not have the resources or the R&D. And then an open call goes out to the participants, who are the vendors or suppliers who come to the project with potential solutions. And this one went the other way around this year, which is fantastic, being a participant, pitching this at Kickstart Day. So after the application filters go through, there's a dozen or 15 or 20 that get pitched live at the IET in London, and 8 go through, which you'll see right here next to us at the Accelerator zone. But the day that you guys pitched, you had a great pitch. Obviously, you won and went through. You had so much attention from these broadcasters. Like, you had BBC and Paramount and all these other, wanting to understand more about the production and where it's going and where it's coming from, too. So we do have a small clip from our friends Andy Hook at White Light. And you guys were working really, really closely with them this year. So let's roll that and see.
I'm slightly concerned whether this is the right clip. We've not.
We'll find out. We're all friends. We're amongst friends. If it's not, we can all laugh. How's that?
Okay, this is not Andy clip, but this is a view on actually the experience.
Anyone they must have known I could hear them.
So this is the concept of what you see. You're cutting between the location-based experience and the digital twin here. So the digital twin can be accessed on a phone, VR headset, laptop. This, you can see these are sort of physical items. There's stuff in these environments which make very realistic sound through the headphones. And then your digital twin allows people in the metaverse, via internet connection or whatever, to experience that as well. You can see we experiment with the idea of having physical props. One of the things with putting sound in real spaces is nowhere in nature do you get a sound without there being a source.
What is going on?
Citizen
I knew
reactions.
I had headphones on and I could hear it, but also my mind was like, but it's playing out loud.
Yeah, it's a powerful illusion.
So it's dead quiet in this room.
Yeah, it's complete sacrifice.
But this
No
is at
way.
White Light Studios, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So at White
Really
Light Studios.
weird. That was amazing.
That is actually very good. Yeah, that is very good.
It felt really real, amazing experience.
These are genuine reactions. No one had the money to pay these people to give us good reactions.
Yes.
So, there's this idea that this sort of physical environment that has props in it has actual stuff you can interchange with, and we think this is, this will be what's happening with wearables. Computer vision is going to enable these sorts of storytelling.
Exactly. So we wanted to actually, that clip is meant to be in the in our presentation here today anyway, but I think it's a good example to throw that in. And the reason why, the original pitch was mentioning that branching narrative whereby, the object-based type of audio and the narratives that go with that, because ultimately within broadcasters are still storytellers, and we've got production teams and things happening, events on the ground, and what you do with that documentary, for example, or what you do with that live music event and things that are happening there. So you can kind of see a little bit of these elements. So let's go straight to you, Jaap, a native Dutchman now living in America. So do you have any message in your native tongue for this audience?
Welkom allemaal.
He said free beers on him. No, okay. So welcome, Jaap. Thank you. Your first time at the IBC Accelerators. And let's deep dive into some of the reasons why you came on board this project, but also thinking about what we're doing with 6 Degrees of Freedom and an immersive audio, and knowing that within our broadcasting industry, interactive audio still plays a huge, huge part of it, and there's still so much to explore with this R&D. So tell us a little bit more about what you brought to the table here.
Yeah, so my journey started when I was driving. That's when the seed was planted. I was driving to work. I heard this ad for Windows on the radio. I was interested. I wanted to visit the website. I heard the website address. 2 minutes later, I forgot about it, and I was driving, so there was nothing I could do. So this started me on this journey where audio's got one direction. There's lots of call to action on audio, on video. It is sometimes very hard to do, and sometimes even when you're driving, it's impossible to act on any call to action. When you look at the Metaverse, the moment you're on the web, you're clicking through a blog, then to a video, then to a podcast, and then the podcast, your interactivity stops. You hear a piece on the radio, interactivity stopped. So audio is what we want to include into the Metaverse by introducing something that could be compared to an audio QR code, an audio hyperlink, and really build out that experience of the one that you're getting online, the digital stuff, to also getting that to audio. There's a second challenge with audio. even if it's video or just radio, it is one directional. There's no data coming back at all. You don't know how many people heard it. You don't know if you got their interest, if they were engaged, if they actually visited a website. You could do a promo code, you do a vanity link, but those is 7-8% of impact that you're getting from your engagement. So what we've built is an audio trigger so that you can include the moment you produce your audio content. You can include that audio trigger into your stream. Can be for video, can be for audio. The audio, the phone will recognize when that audio trigger is played, for example, on the radio, with a promotion, with an ad, with a poll. The phone will open up and ask the listener, are you interested? Ask the audience, do you want to engage with this? Yes or no? The moment the audience says yes, whatever the call to action was, for example, call a phone number, do a vote on if the bachelor should give a rose or not, all that action will be happening automatically with just one click, safe, simple, in the moment engagement. Additionally, you're getting a whole bunch of data also. You know how many people actually heard this piece of content, how many people were engaged with it, how many people actually took the action. You can start measuring attribution on this one stream audio, so getting the same level of data that you're getting from your Facebook ads, also suddenly for your audio content. So how we use this for this proof of concept, so we've used the audio that we've got from the concert with the 3 different ways that you could listen to it, and we've created a podcast. So this podcast is live, it's available for you to experience. So we built a podcast player that has our technology into it to recognize when interactive audio triggers are part of the content. At one point in the audio, there's a question asked to the listener. Do you want to listen to this concert standing next to the drummer, standing next to the singer, May Muller, or standing next to the background singer? And depending on what choice you have, you will get a different experience, so a different narrative experience based on your own choice. We'll have a second choice moment in this podcast example in here, and we also have an actual call to action to go to the iTunes page for you to, if you're interested in a song, you like the song, you can within one click download the song on your iTunes and buy it. So this is what we wanted to build out, and then using the content that we have to play around, hey, how can you engage, make interactivity with your content easier? How you can see this in the future is that you have, for example, a blog that will reference to a specific podcast. Within that podcast, at a certain point, you can do another audio hyperlink to another blog that goes deeper into it, and someone can click and stay in your own content metaverse from, for example, the BBC. Stay in your own content metaverse and click around, including all of the audio content that you have.
Right, and you've been exploring some of these solutions. You know, what other possibilities are there around interactive audio, you know, going forward in the industry? Not going too far. We're not at the end of the session yet, but just knowing, especially around the learnings that you've got from this proof of concept, working directly with the BBC, working directly with King's College University in London, and directly with Paramount. So, you know, the content came from Isle of MTV, which was in Malta. It's a big global concert that goes out. You know, so what are the kind of discussions were you having with the broadcasters at this point?
Yeah, so it's really, most times when you're engaging with your audience, it's you can have someone send a tweet, it's a subgroup, you can have someone to call in, which is one person, but this kind of technology just sends out, hey, what do my audience think? You can send out to the whole audience, people can respond, and you can suddenly start having that real-time engagement moments with your customers, with your audience on political areas, sports, and really start engaging your audience. Instead of them screaming at the radio, they can suddenly start engaging with the broadcaster real time on what should be played next.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, like as you've seen the metamorphosis of content and interactivity and kind of fan engagement and that type of personalization, we do know that that's in demand, you know, from both a production point of view and an audience point of view. So we'll come back to you on some of those looking forward elements too. So we just did want to touch on also the ADM, which is our audio definition model. So before we roll this VT, this is a huge exploration being undertaken by the BBC and lots of other broadcasters in the European Broadcasting Union, and thinking about what these definition models could mean within interactive and immersive audio. So let's roll VT, and I'm going to come to you, John, to kind of unpack this. Thank you.
From a broadcaster's perspective, this accelerator is very interesting, as there are a number of challenges. Firstly, 6 degrees of freedom content does not translate very well to a lean-back TV or radio experience. Secondly, the content contains rich metadata which describes the position, behavior, and timeline for each audio object, as well as the listener. One approach to creating more widely consumable content is by using audio standards that allow the capture and interchange of this information. One such standard is the audio definition model. My colleague at the BBC, Dave Marston, has been involved in the conceptualization and standardization of the ADM, and he's been looking into its application here. Dave, the audio definition model, or ADM, is the standardized metadata model for describing the technical properties of audio. Can you describe the motivation behind this effort?
Yeah, several years ago, audio and broadcasting was moving on from just simple stereo towards multi-channel surround sound, with the possibility of more complex audio formats in the future. Therefore, there was a need to be able to exchange the potentially wide variety of complex audio by using metadata to describe it. The ADM was the solution to this, with the aim of making it a free and open standard the whole industry could use.
Do you think that the ADM could be extended to capture information regarding a 6 degrees of freedom scene and timeline, or can it do this already?
The ADM already supports dynamic positional object-based audio, where the positions of sounds in 3 dimensions can be specified. It also supports higher audio ambisonics, which may also have applications in the 6 degrees of freedom area. The ADM also supports time-limited objects, so these can be used for content that only appears for short periods of time, and also objects that move in space.
John, how important is this to broadcasters, and especially around that metadata?
Well, it's potentially, if at some stage broadcasters want to be able to broadcast more complex audio content, there needs to be a format for doing that. And audio, so if you look, what are we talking about with the audio definition model? It's essentially a polychannel WAV file with a big hunk of metadata in the header. And that's where all the information about all the stuff that the guys were talking about there are about. And it's interesting, you can look at it, there are 2 ways of looking at it, how you might use it. So on one hand, you might consider it an interchange format, so you can take a project created in one place, load it into some other system, and basically have all the, kind of like anyone that's familiar with like OMF, audio interchange files, that sort of thing. Or you might consider it, okay, this is actually the broadcast format. This is how we will broadcast this file, essentially. So if you break that down and think, what's it made of? So it's made of this header at the beginning, and then it's made of a bunch of tracks of, on the face of it, linear content. So in a broadcast context, obviously what you need to do is the system you're sending it to, so the receiver that's then going to do all the rendering, because remember, at the far end, you're broadcasting to some device that is going to take all of this information in the ADM, and it's going to live render whatever's it's telling it to do based on the metadata and then all the audio that's contained in the linear tracks in the rest of the WAV file. Now, in a context where you're using that as the broadcast standard, you need to send all that. It needs to know everything about what's going to happen during the broadcast before it starts actually playing stuff. So you need to construct your format so everything's happening in the header file. So if you think for a minute, okay, so following on from what they were talking about, okay, how well does it already support 6 degrees of freedom? Yes, it has many elements in it already in the way you can dynamically assign positions of objects and have them moving. There are some critical things it doesn't support at the moment. For example, what's the shape of the object? What's its directional pattern in terms of radiation of sound? And very importantly, what's the environment like? Because once you're in the land of 6 degrees of freedom audio, you need to be procedurally generating not only the information from your continuously changing position relative to an object, but all the early reflections from the environment, the reverb, all that sort of thing needs to be procedurally generated. So you need some description in there about that. So, the other thing, so they were talking about that it can cope with sort of some interaction in terms of time-limited audio. But if you have content in there that you're going to need to be able to trigger at any point, you kind of have to, in a broadcast context, you have to have preloaded that before you get into the broadcast. So one of the things you might think about is essentially having a sample library that sits in the header of your ADM file, so it's essentially a sound files within a sound file, so that you're using the metadata to contain a bunch of effectively samples that might get triggered at any point, that can get triggered along with what's essentially the linear data in the rest of the file. If it's an interchange format, that's potentially a different scenario, because you could, in principle, use those tracks and have stuff in the header data that says, okay, my samples are actually in the first 2 minutes of this track. So it's kind of two different ways of looking
exactly,
at
and that standardization though is being put forward for use in more three-dimensional worlds and the digital twinning, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the workflow you just described, I think we'll have a visual on the IBC website. So be sure to go to this this project stand, which is this right here next door, and scan the QR code, and that'll take you to the project page. And if it's not on there today, it'll be on there like tomorrow, because they might have forgotten the slide. But we have one more VT from the BBC, so let's continue that. Thank you, John.
Mm-hmm. The ADM allows interchange and reuse. Can you describe what a conversion might look like between, say, a 6 degrees of freedom interactive experience and a stereo radio broadcast or podcast?
While the ADM metadata is used to describe the audio, there obviously needs to be something that can understand this metadata and do something useful with it. This is where a renderer comes in. It receives the audio and metadata and processes the audio into a format suitable for play out over speakers or headphones. The beauty of a renderer is it can produce an output for any speaker layout you choose, whether it's a simple stereo pair or something more complex like a 22.2 setup. So an ADM renderer could be used to convert 6 degrees of freedom audio into a stereo format for broadcast or podcast.
Of course, an interesting example of this is in the exchange of content between work packages on this project. In order to allow the development of interactive podcasting based on 6 degrees of freedom content, we can make the production process more efficient by capturing all of the relevant information in the ADM. Can the ADM be used to deliver interactive experiences?
Yes, the ADM also allows the content maker to define whether the content can be interacted with or not. For example, allowing the levels of objects to be adjusted or switching between different objects, such as different languages in the dialogue.
Thanks, Dave. Gareth and John, I'll hand back to you now. How do you see 6 degrees of freedom experiences being broadcast in the future? And what do you think still needs to be done to make this a reality?
You could in principle and completely broadcast a 6 degrees of freedom experience, as long as you have, so what he's talking about there, the renderer, is the consumer's device at the end of the line, and you're broadcasting this ADM signal, which is essentially a multiplexed file with a big, as you said, a big header in it and a whole load of audio coming after it. And as long as you've put all the information you need about shapes of objects, where they are, what the space it's in is like, all that sort of thing, all the interaction, you could in principle entirely broadcast that as a signal to be received in a traditional broadcast sense, and
as a broadcast.
Yes.
Yes.
And obviously that could include in principle live material. Obviously you'd have a slight delay while it was processed, and you would be kind of buffering a chunk of the file, etc., etc. But you could in principle, there's no reason you couldn't do live stuff this way as well.
Exactly. And Gareth, do you want to add to that? Since we're
I mean, one of the challenging aspects of it is that the standards progress relatively slowly compared to improvements in rendering. So that's one of the aspects that has to be looked at. And you can definitely see it always being in interchange format, but effectively the acoustic, the kind of acoustic rendering you do is set to sort of improve and improve. We've seen a lot of improvements in the last sort of few years. And that's one aspect that makes it really a break from traditional standards. When you knew if you're pumping out 48K or 44K, 0.1K stereo, it's going to have these sort of aspects for all time, you know. This stuff is potentially something you record now and create in 5 years, 10 years. The core information should remain the same, but your render might look very different. There might be a lot more sophisticated head transfer information that's possible to sort of process. So it will never be as simple as you know. But I guess the same thing. I mean, stuff exists on vinyl. It doesn't sound the same as something's being made now.
No, but we love the scratch. So you're going with the.
I'm just going to add, if I can, that all the information that's in your audio definition model, in principle, allows you to produce all your delivery. You know, in principle, you could produce a whole bunch of delivery requirements of various formats because you've got all the information in there to render to. So in the way that we rendered fixed binaural renders of our experience for Yap to use in the Tune URL experience, you could equally do various flavors of audio render for formats now, some future format yet to be decided. But the important thing is to put in that ADM the basic information that will always be needed in some form, that so in some future scenario someone can come along and, as Gareth says, I've got a better way of rendering this now, but I still needed to know, you know, what shape this thing was, what the reverb time of the room was we were in, all that sort of thing.
Exactly, and that could also be impacted by the type of device that the audio is being experienced out of. And we know that devices and hardware changes so fast. Is there anything you're thinking of in your mind there, Yap, about the hardware and how a user would be experiencing audio, for example?
Yeah, you can see virtual reality. The Google Glasses failed, but Google's got a new one. So all of those things will be closer.
You're just never stopping, is it?
Yeah, you now got the headsets that just go on the bones of your ears instead of in your ears. So it constantly will keep changing on how people experience audio.
Right, so that, you know, and through a production workflows type of sense will change per the devices too. So we do know that we have one more clip from White Light, and this is the one that is, this should be in here, folks. And if they're not, then
I'm not convinced so we do.
You know what? It's not there, but that's okay. We're approaching toward the end. So unpacking a little bit of these learnings here, I think, you know, Yap, let's stick with you here. Like, kind of talk us through like the proof of concept, you know, the learnings that were taken on board, especially from that broadcasting point of view and the technology, and where is your workflow going forward?
Yeah, so it's a new experience for audience to experience with interactivity. There is suddenly not just you sitting back and getting audio come to you. There is going to be a model to experience the audio and engage with it. So it's going to have a little of a culture-based change. The moment you're looking at a call to action with someone who needs to do it, the same as when you have a blog, you see a blue text that's on it, you know it's a hyperlink, so you know you can click it. We need to get the same kind of user adoption experience on like, when is an audio engagement interaction expected from me as a listener? I need to know that somehow. And that still needs to evolve, and something that is good and easy to experience, but still enough of an Pavlovian reaction by the listener, being like, oh, apparently this is an interactive moment. I should, if I'm interested to interact, go to that interaction then. And
that would be in situ of that experience rather than going to Twitter or going to like another option. Yeah. And what about you, John? The finale words going forward.
Sorry.
Do you need to have a think about this?
I need to have a think about it.
Okay, I'm going to go to
Gareth.
Okay, so I mean, one of the things that's really important and is a big bugbear for us is the middle one of these, hardware matters for spatial content.
Yes.
I think, I don't know if any of you are audio people, you may have seen some in Twitter's Sonar Works had like a plot of headphone frequency responses. And they are just, it's like a fat band of, you know, it's just, headphones are all over the place. We you know, a lot of time and effort is being spent researching about sort of having sort of personalized HRTFs. It's not nearly as important as having the ability to flatten frequency curves of headphones. So I think that's a really important thing. Any hardware people out there, I think that stuff, it becomes vitally important. You can get away with stereo sounds are fairly abstract. Your relationship to that material is fairly abstract. It can be a bit squished here, a bit sort of flabby down here, and it works. But with spatial content, you need some level of precision. And that's a really, really important thing. So you have to correct for it and or have flat headphones.
Exactly. So if there are any hardware manufacturers in this room, somewhere in IBC, what do you reckon? Yeah. Come meet them at the Accelerator Zone right here. John, has your brain been turning now? Are you ready?
I think that probably one of the most interesting things that is coming, and it's something that King's College are looking at, is the environmental simulation. That's the stuff that's actually really hard to do, because in principle you have to ray trace in real time, way more complex than trying to ray trace light, because the fundamental difference between, you can treat light as travelling instantaneously, whereas sound has a very evident speed. And that has all sorts of knock-on effects about diffraction and the way stuff bounces off other things and all that sort of thing. And it's doing that modelling in a way that doesn't just eat your CPU is really key. And actually, Kings are just about to start some more research going further than the stuff we've already been able to look at with them. And it's going to be very interesting if it's stuff like because at the moment, most of that is you model shoebox-shaped rooms. And the interesting stuff is, okay, can we model arbitrarily shaped spaces? And that's some of the really interesting
So what John's talking about at King's College London, one of the super prestigious university, and Zoran Čekovic, I'm going to say his name wrong, say it 10 times. Him and some of his team have developed some very, very cutting-edge room simulation software that will enable to capture some of that room simulation. And more material on King's College and some of their learnings can be found at the IBC website. Again, go to the stand, scan the QR code, and you can find it on there too. So any last final words for what this project means going forward, and what would you like to see it become, just right down the road before we close out?
Yeah, I think this stuff looks like it's set aside from broadcast, but if you look at the trend, if you think about what object-based mixing means, all of this is pushing the time of render to the playback. And if you think of it, it's an extension of, it's like hyper-personalization. Your content is being personalized for you and your specific perspective looking around. So this is at this end of the spectrum, but it is a spectrum, and the whole business will move there. And I think being able to change between them is going to become increasingly important. It's very small and niche, but it's, I think, will grow into something.
As if by magic, the what's next slide appears. Exactly. And
so one of the things we want to do next is also to do some more real-life experiments, work together with a broadcaster, do a full interactive show, and really test with the audience, being like, how does this resonate? What works? What doesn't work? What kind of engagement interaction are you looking for? And really see how we can get that adoption of the value of interactive on the content itself. What value can that bring? Interactivity, and also what kind of data, additional data, can we start getting that we currently don't have with any of the audio presentations.
Exactly. And John, big finale from you. I know your brain's, but I can hear it. I can hear something clunking around in there.
I think one of the most exciting things in terms of 6DoF audio actually goes beyond kind of what we're looking at the moment, which is largely entertainment, broadcasting, ultimately, and it's a fair way down the line, but I think we need to think about it as more as a high bandwidth information delivery system. You think of what we were talking about earlier about the way that audio gets straight into your brain. If you can model very well, very accurately, in fine detail, or imagine you can do some sort of audio. Imagine an airliner cockpit that has an ears-up display, so all the instrumentation is available to them. They can hear it, and because you've got that spatial definition, you can have several things saying something to you at the same time, several instruments, and you can focus on it. You can use the same discrimination you've got when you walk into that cocktail party, and you can focus in on one conversation, even though there are loads of them going on.
Which brings us into the 3D worlds, into the M word versus beyond, because I won't be able to say that. But thank you so much. Huge round of applause, please, for Gareth Llewellyn, Yap, and John from 2 Magic Beans, 1 Turiel. Bigger round of applause for that, people. Come on, it's the afternoon, day 1 of IBC. Thank you so much for supporting. My name's been Mookie Callahan. Please come see us at the Accelerator Zone, like feet away. They'll be here doing live demos, so come to their pod and check out some of the object-based audio, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.